everyone, welcome back to Curious Human. Today we're diving into a big question. How many of our genes actually play a role in what we think of as race? It's a topic that's been talked about for a long time, so let's dig into it. When we look at people from around the world, we often notice things like skin color, hair type, and facial features. These are traits that people have used to divide each other into groups called races. But how many of our genes actually create these differences? Let's start with where these differences even come from. People from different parts of the world tend to have traits that helped their ancestors survive in those environments. For example, people with ancestors from sunny areas like Africa often have darker skin. Darker skin helps protect the body from the sun's ultraviolet or UV radiation. In places with less sunlight like Northern Europe, people often have lighter skin, which helps them make more vitamin D from the sun. These differences are real, but they don't mean we're biologically very different. Scientists have found that the idea of races based on these traits isn't really supported by biology. So, to understand how our genes relate to race, let's start with a quick look at our genetic makeup. Genes are like instructions that tell our bodies how to grow and work. Every human has about 20,000 to 25,000 genes made up of DNA. And here's something surprising. If you compare any two people from anywhere in the world, about 99.9% of their DNA is exactly the same. That means only about 0.1% of our DNA is different between people. So, what does that tiny 0.1% difference actually do? It's what makes each person unique. This 0.1% is why we have different eye colors, heights, hair textures, and even why some people are more likely to develop certain health conditions. But here's something important. Only a tiny part of that 0.1% of our DNA that is different has anything to do with traits like skin color or hair type, which we often think of as race. These visible traits actually make up a very small part of our genetic differences. They come from a few specific genes that were influenced by the environments our ancestors lived in. So, if only a few of our genes create the traits we think of as racial, what does that say about race itself? Well, scientists now think of race as mostly a social construct. This means the idea of race is something people created based on appearance, not something rooted in our DNA. Here's something really interesting. Did you know there's actually more genetic variation within races than between them? For example, two people from the same racial group, like two white people, might be more genetically different from each other than either one is from a Black or Asian person. Here's another example to show how humans are connected. Two people from different parts of Africa can be more genetically different from each other than one of them is from a white European or an Asian. This is because Africa has the most genetic diversity of any place in the world. But even with these differences, 99.9% of the DNA of all Africans is the same as other populations in the world, showing how similar all humans are at a genetic level. This greater genetic variation within racial groups than between them is because throughout history, people have traveled, traded, and started families with those from different backgrounds. This ongoing mixing means there aren't clear genetic lines separating populations. So, the idea that distinct races have unique sets of genes doesn't match what we know about human genetics. If race isn't deep in our genes, why does it feel so important? Well, the answer has to do with history and culture. For hundreds of years, people have used the idea of race to explain differences between groups, and unfortunately, sometimes to justify treating certain groups inhumanely. Beliefs about race and biology created stereotypes and led to discrimination. But now, science shows us that these physical differences are only a small part of who we are. They don't tell us much about someone's intelligence, abilities, character, or morality. So if race doesn't define us, what does? Well, each of us is shaped by so many things. While genes play a role in who we are, they're just one part of the story. Our experiences, relationships, and the cultures we grow up in all help shape who we become. For example, someone might be a great musician, athlete, or scientist. And while genes might give some potential, skills also come from practice, opportunity, and determination. The idea that race sets limits on what we can do? That's a misconception. Our potential isn't limited by skin color or ancestry. Scientists today prefer to talk about human diversity in terms of populations rather than races. Populations are groups of people who share certain traits because their ancestors lived in similar environments. These traits include things like skin color, but also others that are less visible. For example, many people with European ancestry can digest milk as adults, while many people from East Asia cannot. These differences are interesting but don't divide us into separate races. So what's the big takeaway here? Understanding that race isn't a big part of our genetic makeup reminds us that our differences are actually pretty small. Race is mostly a social idea, not a biological fact. It doesn't tell us anything about our character, intelligence, or potential. So how many of our genes are responsible for race? Less than 0.1% of our 20 to 25,000 genes are responsible for race. Race is something humans created, not something found deep in our DNA. Science shows we're more alike than different, and what makes each of us unique goes way beyond our appearance. By understanding this, we can see beyond the surface and appreciate what really makes each of us who we are. Remember, there's more to each of us than meets the eye. If you like this video, then like the video, and check out our previous video about why some Africans are genetically closer to Europeans than to other Africans. Thanks for watching Curious Human, where awareness is your superpower. Subscribe to get notifications about other videos from us.